Good afternoon once more. Good afternoon. Okay. So we are now going to start officially this public lecture, and I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Martin Oleche. I'm the chairman of the Department of Economics and Development Studies, and we are the ones who are actually hosting this public lecture. Now, before we start, I'll take you through the program. I know that we sent the program to you via email. So shortly we'll be able to have prayers. Then after that, we'll have the Dean coming, and the Dean will come to represent the Vice Chancellor. Will give a speech on behalf of the Vice Chancellor. And then we'll have our guest coming in to give the lecture. The lecture is on Global Food Policy Report, Global Food Findings. And then after that, we'll have our panelists coming in to actually give some insight on the presentation. Then we'll have the question and answer session. And finally, there will be the vote of thanks session. So let me start by recognizing those who are present now. I start by recognizing the presence of a representative from the Office of the Council of Governors, also representatives from HIPRA, representatives from ARC, African Economic Research Consortium. We also have representatives from Institute of Economic Affairs. They are here, and of course they will be introduced in a special way. We have representatives from Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, from Oxfam also, from Partnership for Economic Policy, from Financial Sector Deepening, that is FSD. We also have the Haki Jamii, and we have the representatives from the World Bank here, represented by Tom. Tom, thank you very much. You have always been with us here. Thank you. We really appreciate you. And I know that we also have representatives here for young economists, quite a number of them. I think young economists who have actually been working at the World Bank. Representatives also, colleagues from Kenyatta University are here. Colleagues from Technical University of Kenya. Professor, you are there, I've seen you. And also representatives from other universities of Kenya who have graced this particular occasion. May I also take this opportunity to also introduce to you our chief guest. The chief guest is Dr. Clemens Brexler, who is the country leader of International Food Policy Research Institute, and is the one going to give the lecture. Maybe if you raise your hands like this so that they can be able to see. Yes, then we also have other representatives from IFPRI, our alumni in the Department of Economics and Development Studies, and I know the young one, our graduate students here will actually benefit from, June. You can also, if you can stand up, and then we have Lensa also from IFPRI, and all other representatives from IFPRI kindly also stand up so that we can be able to see you. I know you're quite a number wherever you are seated. IFPRI, thank you very much. And we also have our panelists, those who are going to discuss this paper after the presentation. Joseph Onjala, who is a colleague in the Department of Economics here, going to discuss the paper. We have Kwame Owino, the Chief Executive Officer of the Institute of Economic Affairs. Kwame, they see you a lot on TV. We want to see you here now. Then, of course, I've already introduced Lensa. We also have our Dean, who is here, Professor Jack. I think you know Professor Jack here. And colleagues also from the Department of Economics and Development Studies who have graced the occasion, they are here. So maybe what I can say is that this particular lecture is very, very important because we know that the issues of food has been a major problem, not only in our country, but also globally. Food crisis. You know, we have had a number of shocks taking place in the world, and these particular shocks have actually led to a shortage of food. And the lecture that we are going to have today will give us an highlight on insights on the presentation. At this particular time, I want to invite the Dean, Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, Professor Jack Odhiambo, to come on his own behalf and also on behalf of the Vice Chancellor of the University of Nairobi. Welcome, Dean. You don't want to clap for him?
So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, to the Department of Economics. I think it's a great honor to see really key people here. I saw Professor Mwabu was with us here. Professor Ngore is there right next to Professor Mwabu. Okay, these are people who are great economists. So we are also very happy to have Clements with us, Dr. Clements from IFPRI. We have had a very nice discussion about what they do there, about research on matters of food and so on, and the great possibilities of collaboration that exist and that are going to be carried out between his institution and Dr. Leche's department, the Department of Economics and Development Studies. So that is a great opportunity, and the faculty is really out there to be able to host this colloquium, these moments of discussion. But then I would like then to represent the owner of the whole institution, the head of the whole institution, the Vice Chancellor, because he's the one who would properly invite somebody from another institution on his behalf. So I will go straight to read the Vice Chancellor's speech. Dr. Clements Brysinger, Program Leader, panelists and invited guests, I take this opportunity to welcome you all to the University of Nairobi. The university is very proud to host the 2023 Kenya's discussion of the International Food Policy Research Institute, IFPRI, Global Food Policy Report, the GFPR. The University of Nairobi continues to create a platform for such discourse. As a university, we believe that from deliberations, fruitful debates, and engagement, we will be able to trigger discussion The disruptions ranging from the prolonged COVID-19 pandemic, major natural disasters, civil unrest, political instability to growing impacts of climate change. The Russia-Ukraine war and inflation equally worsening global food and rising numbers of hungry displaced people have started to rethink responses to food opportunity for change. Free released its 2023 Global Food Policy Report on the 13th of April 2023, titled Rethinking Food Crisis Responses, which I think is this one here. The report calls for rethinking of food crisis responses and making this report therefore provides critical evidence private the key findings and recommendations of this report. It is noteworthy that, to mention that excellence and vibrant research culture, increasing and maximize build coalitions for policy change. It is in this regard that I am happy to share with you a step undertaken by the university and IPRI. The university and IPRI have signed an MOU today. Going forward, the MOU will govern our capacity sharing activities, policy research, communication activities, among other activities of mutual interest. Contribution to science policy in Kenya. Science policy is to national and county government representatives, private sector, and national and international research institutions aims at bridging the existing gap between scientific evidence and policy, thereby facilitating a more coordinated approach to building policy coherence. In addition, the interface aims at creating rapid crisis responses and recommendations as well as policy research solutions as need may arise. It is therefore my pleasure to let us know that the University of Nairobi and IPRI form an integral part of the science policy dialogue and will work jointly to strengthen the bridge, the existing gap between policy and science, one step at a time. And now, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce the keynote speaker this afternoon, Dr. Clemens Breisinger. Dr. Clemens is a program leader and senior research fellow at IPRI, Development Strategy and Governance, DSG unit, since the year 2006. He led IPRI Middle East and North Africa teams and established IPRI Country Programs Office for Egypt. He was based for 6 years. He is now the country program leader for Kenya, based in capacity building and policy advisory work, covers a broad range of issues relating to food systems, transformation, and reduction, security, climate change, conflict, and social protection. Together with colleagues and partners, Clemens produced more than 100 publications that are widely read and quoted by local and international media. Clemens received his PhD in agricultural economics from the University of Hohenheim in Germany. He received it in the year 2006. Please welcome Dr. Clemens with, as he shares with us his keynote address. Karibu sana, and applause for him. Thank you, and welcome Professor Stephen Kiama, Vice Chancellor.
Thank you. All right. Thank you so much, and I'm very happy to be here with you today. I'm happy also to say from IFPRI's side that we are very proud to sign the MOU today of joint research for policy impact, joint capacity sharing, and joint collaboration, and events like the event today. Now, IFPRI produces every year a global food policy report, and it's always on issues that are relevant and timely. For example, last year the report was on climate change. This year, unfortunately, we are facing a lot of crises and have been going on for a long time. So the report this year is called Rethinking Food Crisis Responses. We have very few hard copies. I know this is very old-fashioned, so you can find this report as well as a summary also on the website. Now let's take a look at the vulnerability of food systems, and what we see here that for the first time for quite some time, the number of undernourished people worldwide is on the increase. You see on the left chart how big progresses were made starting from the year 2000. The number of undernourished people declined steadily up until about the year 2010. Then you can see a bit of a constant movement with not much change. But since the COVID-19 pandemic, then the Russian invasion of Ukraine, issues related to climate change, like droughts and floods in places, have really increased the number quite dramatically by about 200 million people since 2018-19. Now, a lot has to do and is then reflected in prices, and that you see on the right-hand side. There is a lot of price volatility going on. So, in other words, this is not just one food crisis now, but there have been quite a lot of food crises going on. So we are, in a sense, living in times of constant food crisis. What you can also see is that food prices, fertilizer prices, and energy prices usually move in parallel, and that's quite logical because to produce food we need fertilizer, to produce fertilizer we need energy. So you can consistently see how those three prices move together. Now, in addition of this global event, there is also more regional and localized events, and they are related to extreme events, also unfortunately increasing number Now, if you think of climate change, some research shows that 21% in growth can be attributed to that, and then also some research shows that climate change contributes to the increase of food insecurity that we have seen before. Now, again, an interesting trend that is there on the chart that can be related in some way to climate change, extreme weather events. What I find interesting is when you look at the orange line, these are the floods, and if you look at the green line, these are the droughts, and then the blue line is somewhat the average. So both of them have become more frequent, floods and drought, but it seems like that the floods have become much more frequent in a sense. Now, obviously, there are always distributional implications of these food crises, and unfortunately, it's the case that quite often the most vulnerable people are affected the most. And here we spotlight the issue of forced migration. And what we find here is that, especially among the forced migrants, the food insecurity rate is extremely high at 80%. So in a sense, the poor people in lower and middle income countries are always suffering the most. Now, what is also very important, and that's throughout the report, is the focus on women gender. And our research clearly shows that especially when it comes to crisis, women are affected differently and often more severely than men, and that's something we need to consider when we think of building resilience. So some research actually shows that this combination of crisis has led to a setback of gender equality goals by 30 years, and that sounds like a lot. Now, this is the, let's say, the overall background, but of course the report talks a lot about policy recommendations, because we are not only here to point out issues, but I think economists and scientists' role is also to provide solutions. What can we do about all these challenges? Now, the first recommendation is related to our early warning systems. Obviously, the earlier we see a crisis coming, the better we can prepare for it, both at the individual level, but also at the government level and at all levels. Now, there are a lot of systems there. The complexity of crisis, because they are intertwined. These crises must also be interlinked and coordinated. To be improved, and again, the integration of the different existing systems is critical to provide timely evidence. Now, also we need an anticipatory action framework. Preparation is important, and that requires monitoring data that illuminates risks, exposure, and the vulnerability of different sectors, different actors, the whole food and economic system. If we had a better anticipatory framework, then the mitigation of crisis can come at a lower cost, and maybe more importantly, can also be geared towards longer-term development goals. Fighting a crisis now, but thinking always about the overall development in the future. And for that, a robust governance system and targeting of interventions can greatly raise efficiency. The second set of policy recommendations is related to a more resilient agri-food system and more resilient value chain. For that, businesses should invest in improved and innovative tools, and examples for that are climate-smart agriculture and new forms of insurance. Governments should create a business environment that also fosters innovations, that allows the private sector to adapt to this crisis. And of course, we all believe in data and how data and data analysis can help targeting assistance to those who need it most better. The next point is related to responsive social protection systems. So if we have a social protection system in place, let's say during normal times, then it will be much easier for us when the crisis comes to use leverage an existing system rather than build a new system when the crisis is here. So the recommendation is to build highly adaptive, flexible, and also inclusive social protection systems. Also, the integration of shock responsive social protection within early warning systems and humanitarian aid can help a lot. And we need to explore new ways to cover costs, for example, climate and green financing, and reducing costs, for example, using digital technologies like mobile payment systems, etc. So new technology, digital tools can help in this process. Now, an important part is the empowering of women amidst crisis. What do the authors mean by this? There are different dimensions. It starts again by our core business of data and the quality of data to better understand issues and responses during crisis. Also, we need more explicit gender targets in crisis response and then also tracking them. And then we need to increase women's participation. And what do we mean here? We mean at all levels. So this is not just a matter of making decisions in the households, but here we see it's really important to have women also in high offices and in decision-making positions, and that can help a lot. The next point is responding to forced migration. We see here in Kenya and other places that have neighboring countries with a lot of problems. Like the latest example, of course, is in Sudan. So we have hundreds of thousands of people fleeing to neighboring countries, and that is not easy for the hosting country. That's not easy for the migrants, of course. So governments should invest in infrastructure and design policies that expand the benefits of migration. So migrants, in other words, can also be helpful for a country, and we need to look more into this, especially if people are forced to stay longer. Now, this book, and of course what I could do now is just a very kind of brief overview, has basically seven chapters, and I invite you all to delve a little bit more deeper into it. So there's a chapter on resilience, how can we be more resilient, a chapter on risk monitoring, a chapter on crisis resilience, agri-food value chain, social protection, gender, and forced migration. And again, I just gave you one or two bullet points from each of the chapters, but of course there is a much richer content there. There are also 6 regional chapters because we know each world region is a bit specific. And my colleague June will talk about Africa and Kenya after me, so we'll delve a little bit more into detail. Now let's sum this up. Obviously, a global food policy report always tries to be timely. This year, it's a lot about the crisis. We have contributions from IFPRI researchers, but also a lot of contributions from our partners. So hopefully, when our partnership between IFPRI and the University of Nairobi grows, we can have some contributions also from the University of Nairobi in a future global food policy report. We have a bunch of concrete strategies. Maybe if we can break it down to two takeaways from this talk, is there is already a lot of research out there. Additional investments in new research and also building databases and models, all these predictive and preventive research can really serve decision making to come up with new nexus strategies. And then when we think more broadly, yes, there is a crisis, but we always need to keep in mind the overall development of a country. So transforming the economy and also transforming food system is a logical, more longer term and also very powerful entry point from which countries can achieve resilience. Okay, so let me leave it at that and then invite, I think June is next to talk about Africa and Kenya. Thank you.
Okay. So let's come closer home. I'll speak about the crisis in Africa and more so in Kenya because mostly that is our business. And I'll start by presentation of the African findings per se. And then in the Kenya, we can discuss about the impact of the Ukraine war. And this is from a study that we did with our partners. And also more interesting is the impact of implementing the bottom-up economic plan. And this is having it in the midst of all these crises. So we want to see what this means. So we have the three kind of approach. So I'll start from where Clemens has left, the global picture. Now we are in Africa. We know that why are we concerned about the region? It's because some of these crises affect specific regions. And let's say, for example, the locusts. You find that they'll affect a specific region in the country, and this is why it should be our concern. So what we look and what we find from the report is that in Africa, at least 20% of the population are facing food insecurity, and this is a concern in our region, given that we know even other crises that we've been having, say floods and all that. And if you look at the different regions, let's say South Africa and the Central Africa, they do have crises, and in this case, we have the Ebola, we have the locusts, we have floods, we have climate change, and we share a lot in our region. And more so, even some of them that we are affected from the global crisis, let's say the Ukraine war. We have drivers that are really not very unique from our region, and one of it is the conflict. Some is the weather we've seen and we've experienced this, and that is the floods and the droughts, and also poverty. It comes to be a crisis in the region, and this is mostly attributed to the weather, factors also attributed to the agricultural policies that will also make the prices for the food to be up. And these, let's say, for example, we have the declining export prices, and sometimes we have policies that do favor a certain kind of food that will be affected, and this will also raise the food prices in the country. Other shocks and other drivers of the food crisis we have is, let's say, the COVID-19 that we've experienced in the region, and more recent, even the Ukraine war. So given these drivers, which are not unique to our region, we look at the gendered effect of the food crisis. And this is because we've realized that from research, that is, the crisis, and not only the food crisis, do affect the gender differently, and that is the men and women. And this is because of their different norm and cultural practices, and also the roles that they play given the crisis. And so it is important even for us to be cognizant of the different impacts, so that even when you're coming with policy and responses and resilient actions, we are cognizant of these differences. And for example, what we saw is that there is price shocks in several countries, and this is due to COVID. And some research shows that 33% of women versus 30% of men were affected. And we'll dig deeper to see in different aspects of how they're affected in terms of these crises. And this is just important for us to note. So we'll move closer to the impact of the Ukraine war conflicts in Kenya. And this is a study that was done by IFPRI and our partners. And it was interesting to see how the war that is happening miles away and how it will affect us and how it affects us and in which channels. So the war did affect us in different ways, and it came in the country in 3 different shocks, if you may say so. So we experienced the fertilizer price shock, we did experience the food price shock, and also the energy, the fuel shock in the country. And you can see some of the highlights of the results and what happened to our country is that at least 6,800,000 people who are in they got into the poverty during this, and this is through the fertilizer shock. I'll get deeper into it and how this happened. Even to the agri-food system. So if you look at the whole system and what it contributes to the GDP, this dropped, and for the reasons of the fertilizer and the price shocks. If you move closer to see some of the highlight results on what we have in the GDP and employment, and we'll want to see how the Ukraine war affected our GDP. Generally, we could see that the GDP declined, and in the right-hand side, you could see the change in GDP and employment due to the fuel, food, and fertilizer shock combined, all of them. So we see in the whole economy, there was a reduction in the employment with the red bar up there in the whole economy, and even in the different sectors. So the whole economy and agriculture, and also the off-farm and outside agriculture, the employment was affected differently. But of interest, you could see an employment of off-farm employment was quite heated, and it declines, as well as the GDP. And what does this mean? This means that even with the global crises happening, we are affected in our own economy, and it is important because then this will help us think through on the different and specific variables on how we respond to. If you look closely in the import costs, it was high due to the spending of the domestically produced goods. There was fall in production. We could see there's employment that has declined, and also the GDP declined in both agriculture and off agriculture, and that is quite something to think about even as we move forward, and probably not hoping for another crisis to happen. Looking closer to what we consume in the household, and given that we're looking at the food crisis, how is this war affecting probably even what you consume in the house? And it did affect in different ways. If you look at the different households for the different quarters, you have the rural, urban, poor, and rich in this case, and all were hit differently. And why is this important? It's because every shock hit different households differently. And it was important to note that for the 3 different shocks, and looking at the 3 different households, let's say for the fertilizer shock, it is important for the rural and poor household. Why is this the case? It's because you find that most of the households that are in the rural and probably in the lower quantiles are practicing agriculture. And so this fertilizer shock will be harder or even much because they are concerned in the fertilizer. And for the fuel shock that happened, and this is during the war, it is important to know that the urban and non-poor households were much affected in this case. And this is because they earn more income outside the agri-food system, and they also consume a lot of imported products that is largely even the fuel. So then they were hit differently. And for the food prices, this affected all the households. And in this case, we see that there are higher food consumption share for the poor. So this means the poor were even hit worse, and they suffer for these crises when they do happen. So the next thing that we look at, so those are just the headline results that we had for the impact of the Ukraine war. And there is more detailed and more specific results. Due to the interest of time, I think I'll present on the impact of the implementation of the plan we have. And you'll wonder why we present this in the crisis. So different governments are acting and they are caught up by these crises. And sometimes they do have plans that they want to implement, and maybe they have plans that they're still implementing. But it's also good to recognize the effort that is done, and even probably to see what is foreseen to have in the economy. And so just to mention that this is work that is modeled, the economy-wide, it's an economy-wide analysis. And then we do a scenario, we run scenarios, and we have our baseline kind of results. And the baseline is, if we just stay business as usual without the plan, where will we be? And having the plan that we have with the government, then where do we anticipate to be, or where will we be in the period of 5 years? So we did the scenario, and these are quite interesting results to have and to share, and just to think about them. And as we think about them, we know that we have to think in the back of our minds of the crises that are coming ahead. So sometimes we do have plans, but then with the crisis, then it quite negates the benefits that we have. So with that being said, with our plan, we have on the right-hand side, you see there's a graph, and that is the baseline run of where we will have been in the different indicators, and then with the accelerated growth, and this growth is modeled from the plan. And you can see in the total GDP, the economy, it's to grow faster from the accelerated growth, from 4.8% to 7.2% per year. And this is if all that is said is implemented. We also see that in different variables, and that is indicators such as the consumption and the exports will increase quite high given the accelerated growth as anticipated by the plan. And this is a good thing to start with, I mean. And also that even for the investment. So the thing we could look deeper in what the plan will do, or what it anticipates to do, it's on the sector GDP growth. And in this, we look at the different sectors and the focus on the specific sectors. And for this case, we see that the growth accelerates in all broad economic sectors that we have in the country. And the agriculture, so that was the focus of the simulation and the analysis. And we could see that given this plan, the economy continues to undergo some structural changes. So this is having it in that this is with it we don't have crisis, and we are operating in a very normal and ideal situation. The economy will grow and undergo some structural changes. Of interest, I think we will look at maybe the agriculture. We see that even with their focus, it is actually estimated to increase and have an accelerated growth of 5.6% from the business as usual growth that we will have, ideally for 3.4%. Let's look at what this plan will have as an impact in our households. And the income and the employment rise, as you know, the first will be to have more employment. And what the analysis shows is that it's true that with the simulation, we will have an increase in the employment. And looking at, again, in the right-hand side graph, we have the poverty and food security outcome under the base and accelerated. We see that we will have reduced poverty headcounts, and there's also reduced poverty gaps, and this is a good thing. And also, looking at the food security, given that that is our focus and that is our interest, we will see that the hunger headcount will reduce with time, and that is for the 5 period. And also, the diet that we consume will reduce. This is just to show and give a conversation of what is being planned and what you foresee to do. And even as we think about rethinking the global crises and what we have, it's the actionable plans framework moving forward. As I mentioned, just presented the highlights of the impact, but we do have complete results and publication which you can get from this. Thank you very much.
Much the presenters, Dr. Clement and June. I think they need some applause. Why don't we for them? Okay. Quite insightful. Now, at this particular time, I'm going to give Professor Damiano a chance to come and take us to the next program. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the nice presentation. So we need to move to next level. The next level, we have panelists who will be coming to give their thoughts, observations on what has been presented, and from their own work that they have done, what else we could do to improve on or to reduce these issues of food insecurity. Of course, the presentation has talked about several key things. The issue of climate change. We have seen more frequent flooding, droughts, and the effect food issues of COVID. Of course, everybody experienced that, and of course, with COVID, there was closure of border and also lockdowns, which led to it causing reduction in production. Of course, fertilizer prices, energy prices, and so forth. So from that, of course, the second presentation also mentioned what is happening in Africa and particularly in Kenya. It has painted a good picture that things might improve. What about if they don't? If we do not implement it the way they are? Those are, I'm just putting things across so that you can think about them. So then let me go to the panelists. We have 3 panelists with us. The way we have arranged it is not the way it's normally done. We would have panelists sitting here and giving us their thoughts as a group. But then what we'll do, I'll invite each one of them to come, maybe 5 to 10 minutes. Just give your thoughts, perspective, observations on what has been presented and also any additions on this. So I would like to invite the first panelist. Maybe I can shuffle around so that I don't follow what is on the order. I will invite the panelists who have come from out first, then our own from the University of Nairobi will come last. So when the visitor comes, the visitor eats first before you eat, yeah? So that is the kind of philosophy I'm trying to follow here. So the first panelist is, that I wish to invite is Kwame Owino. Kwame Owino is the Chief Executive Officer, Institute of Economic Affairs in Kenya. We all have seen him discussing various issues. So, and we are very happy that he accepted to come and discuss this issue on food crisis. So thank you so much. Welcome, Kwame.
All right, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for the kind invitation. I think I have to start with congratulations. I know when an institution in this place, IFPRI, is used to producing a global report every year, it becomes part of the tradition and almost taken for granted. But as a person who sits outside and has seen the chapters, I had an advanced copy and I looked at them. I think you need to congratulate yourself for a well-done job. So because I have like 10 minutes, I've organized my thoughts. That's sufficient usually, I think it's okay. I've organized my thoughts around 4 questions. So I'll go through them quickly. Some are questions, some are just basically stating the obvious, but in my So when I read this report, I read the summary. I didn't get to read the whole report, but I read the summary and then went through my favorite chapters. Certain things came clear to me. And one of the first is basically, I think we saw evidence and data and controvertible that there's an increase in extreme weather events, droughts, and extreme weather events, droughts, and floods. And what that evidence tells me is that I don't know that the world or any country has figured it out how to reduce them. So we have to sit back here knowing that the frequency of those will continue. And there's a tight connection and a very plausible connection with what it means for food security generally. So I think creating that idea about what climate change might mean or weather changes globally, I think is an important one. And what it confirms to me is the fact that increasingly, and there's debates that is sensible about whether all these changes are permanent or are they just clustered to a part and we've had them over time. But just the centrality of these systems, I mean, what's happening over time is something that you cannot ignore when you're talking about food specifically, and especially in the African continent. That's the first. The second point is just basically that this is a continent that's called the continent of the future. People expect that by the year by the end of this century, which is the year 2100, something like 40–45% of global population will be here. There's also the argument that global commerce will shift substantially towards these populations. And the contradiction is that this is a continent that actually suffers vulnerability to food, or rather I call it that spatial incidence in Africa is higher than in the rest of the world. Which is, and I hope our simulation assessments about the bottom-up economic transformation model is real, because if it isn't, then these states are failing and failing badly. Let me say why. Many times people are asked about what's uncontroversial and non-trivial in economics. And for me, I go back to studies by Amartya Sen, which proved, in my view, one of the easiest problems to solve is a problem of food insecurity. The economics, global systems, and technology all lead you to one thing, that it is actually solvable. So if we are not, and we have 20% of people on the continent who do not have sufficient food and stuff like that, it's not even actually a question of volume in terms of how much quantity of food. It is a question of what? Of incomes, which takes me to my point. I also like the fact that when food is accessed, one thing that governments of the African continent look about. When food is accessed, or rather when food is spoken about in Africa, we think that you talk about agricultural policy as meaning food policy. This report has made it very clear, abundant in my mind, that food security, it's actually a system. And when you're thinking about systems, it requires a more elaborate thing than assuming that if you just tip one thing, then that's necessarily it. So thinking about food in form of a systems, I think that's a very, very important thing. It reinforces, maybe it's clear and self-evident to scholars, agronomists, and agricultural economists. It's not always evident to policymakers, the truth be stated, including in our country. One of the things that you see is when you look at the systems, you understand the systems on both the demand and supply side, but one of the things that it tells you is why those unequal impacts work the way they are. Because systems work with other systems and generate disproportionate effects in different places. But I'll come to the fact that what happens then when you talk about food crisis, then for a student of economics, what it does to me is what price effect does it have? And in my view, one of the ways you respond to a price effect, taking food as a good, right, your normal good, well, some people argue that some foods are given goods. The lower your incomes, the more you spend on them. But let's accept for the time being that it's just your normal good. What that means is when there's a shock such as this, right, it actually is a shock that is not just on the food supply and demand. It's a shock on the income. Telling us that when we talk about one of the solutions, and it could have been emphasized a little bit more as a solution, so this is my only criticism, is that the food security problem, in my view, is mostly an employment problem. So as you solve and you go upwards, one of the things we need to think about it is how do we make employment? Now, employment and labor productivity, because in most of the African continent, as you saw, I think the huge correlation is basically the labor productivity. So it's not just farm productivity, but labor productivity throughout that spectrum. So maybe that's one thing. So next time, perhaps a chapter could be dedicated to that connection between labor productivity and food security. And the final one is, so we work at the Institute of Economic Affairs, and maybe it's not clear to students of it. It is. I mean, when I speak to lay people, I say this, but I can't say it here. This year marks 300 years since Adam Smith was born. So at the Institute of Economic Affairs, we've dedicated, every year we choose an economic scholar of huge standing, and we dedicate ourselves to learning his work and using that in our public education. And Adam Smith's arguments about free trade, I think that one of the things that, and you mentioned it in the study, so is opening trade and more trade around food would actually help with some of these shocks. And yet politically, when you have those shocks, opening up to trade is a very difficult problem because we tend to think, especially in the African continent and now in Kenya, we tend to think that Ugandan powdered milk should have a passport saying that they're Ugandans and they need visas to come into Kenya. So that's a difficult thing to sell to people. But it also tells you about how political formations and the political economy effect has its effects on nutrition and how people resolve that thing. And then the very final point is, I think African countries and low-income countries, low and middle-income countries are forming safety nets, or rather welfare systems and safety nets and social protection, sorry, at comparatively lower income levels than they were formed in the north of, in Europe and in North America. And people argue that because the poverty problem is higher here, I actually think that because these countries are forming new institutions, and I call those rules institutions for social safety and social protection earlier, the keenness to actually have efficient social protection systems becomes acute. So we cannot form social protection systems like they're done in Denmark. We need to form social protection systems which says the marginal cost of a bad solution is extremely high and expensive because the resources are scarce. And so in your emphasis of safety nets that are related to cash transfers specifically and as a form of social protection, in my view, speaks very firmly for its cost effectiveness and is something that I wish the government of Kenya approved, or rather recognized a little bit more than the fertilizer program that, in my view, has gone a cropper. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kwame, for that discussion. So next panelist, I would like to invite Lenza Omune. Lenza Omune is a researcher officer with IFPRI. And so please come and share with us your thoughts.
Thank you so much. My name is Lenza Omune, working at IFPRI, and majorly under National Policies and Strategies for Food, Land, and Water System Transformation Initiative in Kenya. I'll talk a little bit about it after this. Now, recently, I had a very interesting conversation with a farmer. I went to my rural home, and this is a farmer who normally plants maize every season. And I think this is the 8th time he's doing so and not harvesting anything, but he's still planting maize. So we were talking about the resilience and adapting to this crisis that we are now experiencing, and at a farm level, what he's doing. It was just a random discussion. And he told me that he's aware that the shocks, this is not the first or the last, okay? And he told me that he's only doing what he's used to doing. Because one, it's much easier for him to do so, and it doesn't have much information, and the government is not making it any easy to sensitize him. That was his concern. But then, looking at the maize, she was shocked up with it. I told him, why are you not even weeding? Because at farm level, at least do something from your end as well. In as much as you could have all the excuses and the blames, but I can see you have not been practicing well in terms of having good harvest. And then he told me that you are researchers, you know that I research. You see, people also have a lot of research. Hearing something that there's a new variety of seeds, and I haven't seen it. I've been growing this 40-year-old seed, in my farm. And he told me one thing that struck me. He told me that people, you should be talking to the government, because seemingly you people are doing your research and you're in the shelves. Because if the government knew that there's evidence of new variety of seed, I think somehow they will create an environment or a policy that will make sure that the farmer makes use of the new variety that is probably resilient to some of these shocks that we're talking about, like the climate. Now, I left him and told him to go and weed because the farm was bad, you know. So, and that somehow had a conversation in my head. This is a farmer who has brought up a very key element of policy and science dialogue, okay? And with the crisis, the continued crisis, he's also brought up an element of we are expecting this crisis all the time. So therefore, there's need to see how we consider, how we approach the crisis, preparedness for crisis, and as well as adapting to crisis. Now, this report presents very key recommendations that are very good to us, and if implemented, it would be a great it will add value to the smallholder farmers as well as those who are engaged within the food system. Now, one thing that I would want to talk about is that discourse, the policy and science interface. I work under the national policy, the NPS, we call it NPS, and we have three main objectives: building policy coherence, we have integrating innovative policy tools for analysis of these crises and responding to them. Then we also have responding to policy demand and policy demand and crises. Now, one thing that I would appreciate is the fact that we have this report, we know what is happening in Kenya, but now how do we ensure that this recommendation reach at the level, at the policy table, where we can now, the government can pick it up and come up with a better or a better informed policy. And this, I would mention that we recently had a conference, a Kenya Food System Conference, which is sort of bringing the partners together to have sort of dialogue, and we can easily respond to crises, we can easily respond to demand, we can strengthen the existing interface that we have, so that we have a more and strong coordinated approach towards this crisis. Now, talking about the report, it has mentioned quite well about the gender impact of these shocks. And one thing that is coming out clearly is the issues of women. Most of the time when we talk about gender, we normally talk, it's women, but of course there's men also in it. But I haven't seen the youth. So the youth also in Kenya, we know Kenya, we are more youthful, relatively a youthful population, and we have so many concerns. So how do we engage our youth in the food system? In response to crisis, how do we? So this is something that I would encourage that in the next publication, that we also look at not only women and vulnerable, but we have specific issues of concern as the youth, given that Kenya specifically is a relatively youthful nation. Now, I'll also talk about the data gaps that are existing. My background in economics, and before I joined IFPRI, I used to work at Bureau of Statistics, compiling GDP for the country. I was part of the team compiling GDP for the country. And a lot more gaps you experience, especially when you're talking about the gender dimension and even the youth dimension. So you realize that even in this report, there's a lot of mention of data gaps that are existing, and we are aware that if we can't measure it, we don't know. So the issue of the existing data gaps, the gendered data that are specific to gender as well as the youth, is quite important, and I like the fact that it has been highlighted in this report. Now, June has talked about the plan, this new government that is coming in amidst a lot of crises, and they have this development strategy that they want to implement, and there's a simulation towards assessing the likely impact of this economic plan to the economy. But one thing that comes out clearly is that we somehow having two scenarios, the business as usual. Most of the time we think that we are quite optimistic. We normally say, things will just happen the way they should, isn't it? But now you realize that with this continuing overlapping crisis, then it's not business as usual. Then now what do we do? How do we ensure that the government have, as recommended, actionable anticipatory actions within their, say, budgets, within their system, within their programs, to cater for future crises that we anticipate? Because I don't think, like the farmer in my village said, that this will not be the first and the last one. We have more that will come probably later on. We'll have another crisis that will be coming up. So the question is, how do we ensure that government have the system that is anticipatory and they are integrated in their programs as well as their budget system? So that is a question that we should ask ourselves as we try and improve our situation and adapt to the new normal, given the crisis that we are experiencing. Now, I'll talk about our work in Kenya. As I said, I work at IFPRI, but majorly on this initiative, the National Policy and Strategies Initiative. And we are guided by three main pillars: the building policy coherence. We have integrating, innovating policy tools in our institutions so that the institutions are able to access the tools that we are creating and use them for their analysis, and also to have to respond to the future crisis that we experience. Then the last one, we have responding to policy demand as well as the crisis that we are experiencing. And through the policy coherence, now we are talking about, later on we'll be able to have an interface that brings policy guys and the science, the evidence, the researchers together. And I'm glad that the University of Nairobi, as a research institute, as a think tank, will be part of this effort that will ensure the strong coordination towards responding to this kind of crisis. Because these crises are they are here to stay. I think we should put that in our mind, and we should look at various ways in which we can have our early warning system in place and integrate them in our various programs, and as well as in our budgets as government. So with that, I don't have much ado, and I will take back to the mic to our facilitator or moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, Lenza. You have brought in and re-emphasized several things. That is dialogue. How do we reach out to policymakers, and how do policymakers reach to us for solutions? That's another issue that we need to think about, even as we think about this crisis. And also the issue of gender and the youth. So let me invite our final panelists. That is Dr. Onjala, Joseph Onjala. Dr. Joseph Onjala is a senior lecturer in the Department of Economics and Development Studies. So Onjala, welcome to give us your thoughts. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity. And I want to say that it is always a privilege, to be the last speaker. Because, by then, people have said everything, and you have a choice of either, saying little or keeping quiet. So, but in this case, I have decided to make some brief comments on this, very impressive report. And I think, you'd agree with me, those of you who found time to go through the report. It is a very comprehensive report, covering, all spheres of food, insecurity, and the kind of response that we might require in our generation to deal with these issues of insecurity. In particular, the earlier discussions, earlier parts of the report talk about the need for early warning systems, anticipatory action, social protection, issues of conflict are some of the issues that we need to watch out for. And at the end of the report, we see that even though we might have all these anticipatory actions, we have systemic issues that should preoccupy us more, because regardless of how prepared you are, you always run into issues of systems. And the concluding part of the report talks about issues of climate and environmental services. Gladly, we are told about last year's report, which focused on climate change and food insecurity. And there is also trade and economy, infrastructure, governance, health, and social protection issues, which need to be re-examined every other time to deal with this food insecurity. Now, my focus is going to be on East Africa, because everybody else was talking about Kenya and the world, and Africa. So let me focus on East Africa. And fortunately for us, East Africa produces enough food in the sense that we still have to deal with persistent problem of food insecurity. And yet, we produce enough, and yet every year, every time, we run into the same type of problem. So what is the issue? And so my discussion will focus on only one issue, because there are, when you're dealing with systemic issues, it's not enough to look at one particular issue. And what is underscored in the kind of food insecurity that we encounter in East Africa is the inability to move food from surplus to food deficit areas. That's a major challenge, because countries in the region, in totality, they are producing enough food. Why should we be talking about food insecurity in the region? It means that some countries are food surplus, other countries are food deficit. And we need to be able to create systems that allow us to move food from the surplus countries to the deficit countries. That is a challenge we have. But even before we deal with that challenge, of course, in the region, we know that the agricultural land is about 60% of the total land area. There is a diversity. There are countries with larger proportions of agricultural land, small proportions, and yet, area, only 21% of the land is, easily arable. And which means that we also need to build in our systems mechanisms either to increase productivity of the arable land or expanding the total land area that could be productive agriculturally. So in a sense, also we are dealing with issues of low productivity, and if you look at the data, you will see that cereal yields, cereal are the staple food in the region, and you find that largely the yields are quite low across the region. Some countries are barely producing anything when their neighbors are quite productive. So what is the issue? What does that tell us? Now, the bigger picture is that we need to re-examine our regional common market and customs arrangements so that we can move food from one area to another with ease. That would be the immediate thing that we need to focus on. And yet we know how watertight some of the, how rigid some of our systems are if you want to move food from one country to another. You have to be prepared to deal with the cross-border transit time. Even if you are able to move food very fast from one country, when you reach the border, it is a different system altogether. And by the time you get food across the country, food which is sometimes perishable, it means that you'd have lost quite a bit of that food. And so you are not able to address the gaps in food insecurity within our region. We have to deal with the challenges facing many of our traders, particularly the women traders. They dominate the trade, especially the food trade across the borders. And I happen to have done a bit of work with Trademark East Africa on the kind of encounters that women have to go through in order to move their goods across the borders, especially during the time of COVID-19. Women traders were subjected to all sorts of humiliating exposures as they were trying to not only deal with the COVID, but also try to make a living. So these are the issues that we could easily run away with by finding solutions that make it easy for us to move food from one part of the country, to another. Even though, of course, the regional countries could boast of the regional integration and all those beautiful documents they have to anchor the integration. There is still, a lot of territorial protectionism. And countries come out to defend, their turf, even when it is clear that they need food more than the other country. But for them to admit this food that they require, you find all sorts of tariff barriers. And people have to give up, huge sums of money to transport food, across the border. So these are big challenges as we try to talk about the food security issues in the region. There are issues about the seed regulations, pesticide, standards about food safety, and of course, a lot of officials at the border, they take advantage of these, subjecting traders to all sorts of, containment in order to extract rent from that. This cannot be happening when our political leaders are not aware. Because really, if you are a policy maker and you know that food should move from a neighboring country to your country during crisis, the speed at which the food will be moving can be very, very important in alleviating the challenges. But to a large extent, we also need to look at our policy frameworks in terms of the agricultural policies that would help us individually to close the yield gaps that are glaring in most cases. We talk about fertilizer, but are we able to use fertilizer efficiently? It's not enough to bring shiploads of fertilizers. Is that fertilizer helping enhance productivity among our farmers? It's a major issue. Of course, now you can gauge the amount of fertilizers that we received and see whether it had any impact on our agricultural productivity. And you can see that that impact is negligible, if not zero. So these are important issues. The issues about low water productivity, because often we rely on rainfall in agriculture. Sometimes the rain is too much, sometimes it is little. But does the farmer receive support to know how to balance the activities against the quantities of water they receive? In some countries that are highly developed, they are engaging in what is seen as the precision irrigation, where technology allows them, and there is precise targeting of individual crop. So there are serious problems of food, food waste in our system. Often, sometimes you'd have had a lot of food produced in one part of the country going to waste. Farmers don't know what to do with their crops. Then, shortly after that, there is a food crisis. And people are asking that, we were talking about our granaries being completely full last month. But now, where is that maize? Where has it gone? Was it thrown away by farmers? Or was it exported? So these are the kind of issues that, one would want to interrogate, especially at the research level, in order to try and understand how the training systems could work better to enhance food security. The transport system, for example, how can it be, what would be the impact of that on food security? The delays in the customs barriers, how this on food security. So, in a nutshell, this is really what I wanted to point out, that beyond the overarching issues that were raised on bigger issues that require preparations, in response to food crisis. Individually, we need to be able to interrogate our own different systems to see how this can be aligned to responding to the food crisis that we face. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wanjala, for that discussion. So quite a number of things have come up from the presentations. Of course, Wanjala has brought in the issue of systems, that sometimes systems do not work even when there's food. And you'll find some people are hungry here, others have plenty, and even wastage. So that is maybe an issue one needs to think about. Then from the presentation, we also heard that, of course, the various shocks that happen would lead to issues of unemployment. And then from the panelists, we also heard that actually the issue of food insecurity is an issue of activity and employment. So it seems there is a vicious circle somewhere. Maybe we need to think about how we can do that. Apart from the border issue that Dr. Wanjala talked about, even within the same country, you will find that maybe that is the systemic thing that you are talking about, but within the same country. You find that some counties have enough food. In fact, food is being wasted in some counties, but others have plenty. And this just happened in Kenya recently, or was it last year? When Nyandarua, which bought us Nyeri, Nyandarua had a lot of food being wasted. But in Nyeri, people were. So what was the issue? This country, these two counties are neighboring counties. So you can see the issues that really lead to food insecurity. Maybe one of the things we didn't mention, and maybe I can mention so that maybe some of the panelists, if whoever wants to respond to this can, or if you want to talk about it, you can talk about the issue of storage, food storage, where there is a lot of, after harvest, a lot of food going to loss of storage. Maybe that is something I didn't hear discussion on, but which I think also is important. Also in the report, on that in terms of a few minutes, if any of that, I would welcome you to thereafter for question and answer time. And any one of you would want to come? Okay. Probably let me just open it to question and answer time. And so if a question touches on what you said, you would also come and say something. So, any questions? Comments? Don't have to be questions. Comments? Observations? Yes, let me take. We have one here, another. So I'll take those two first. Do you have a mic? Just come. Please also just come, and there was another hand there. Just also come. So you introduce yourself and ask the question. There was another, you had a question? Yes, also come. So say your name and ask your question.
So my name is Lydia, Miss Lydia. I have a question. Okay, and I'm also from the university here, University of Nairobi. So my question is mainly, I wonder how we can talk about food crisis without mentioning GMO. That is the center of it all. Because when the Western world think of solving the food crisis in Africa, they don't think of improving infrastructure. They don't think of, they think of other things. They think of GMO first. So we need to talk about GMO. So in our African beliefs, we believe that GMO will kill us. GMO is not good for us. I'm speaking on behalf of my mother in the village. Okay? Education tells us it's a solution to food crisis. So when I try to tell my mother to use the GMO seedlings that are being introduced by the government, she says if she uses them now, she will die later. But right now, she has no maize to feed her. So I ask her, so do you want to die now or to die later? So the question here is, part of the policy recommendations, if you choose to go the GMO way, is to sensitize, because that's an immediate solution. If we talk about improving infrastructure, how do we convince the Kenya Kwanza government that you've been developing infrastructure to productive areas to improve access of the goods to the market? But now we want you to invest in infrastructure such a way that we have an SGR railway to Turkana. How will they do that? To a place where it's not productive. So we need to rethink of policies that are immediate and long-term, policies that are feasible, and those that are not feasible based on the cultural context of this country. Thank you.
Another person who has a question, please just
Hi, everyone. So I'm Grace Kimani. I work at the Council of Governors, Blue Economy Committee, and Supporting Agriculture Committees. So I have several comments and a question to our first panelist. I think you mentioned unemployment as a major cause, as one of the causes for food insecurity. So self-employment, not think about formal employment all the time. We can also integrate indigenous knowledge, whereby you don't need to go to school, or rather you don't need to wait until you gain skills to employ yourself, because we've had interventions where people think that the youth always have a system, or they always have a solution because you're just from the school. So yeah, let's start from the solution, going back to the beginning. To our second panelist, I have rather a comment. I've had what do you call it? I've had some consultations, we've had meetings with the governors and some the deputy governors and CECs. So you've talked about policies. Some of the governors are really tired about policies. They are the implementers, right? So they want to see what is on the ground. They are saying we have a lot of policies which are not being implemented. So based on that, I want to ask if you guys have how do you follow up whether the policies are being implemented? Is there an M&E department, have an implementation matrix whereby we don't just make policies and leave them there? Another thing, I appreciate the fact that you've mentioned about gender and youth inclusion in all these interventions, and also to assure you that some people that there are things that are going on and the interventions going on at the county levels. We are currently unbundling. Now, so one of the things that food security is a part of the concurrent functions, both at the national and the county levels. So we are actually for these things, to budget for food security, and by doing this, we're encouraging them to include them in their CDPs and their MTP interventions. Another thing that's going on in that unbundling, we are trying to say, this is speaking to the fourth panelist, that is, whereby you've said about harmonization of levies. Currently in Kenya, we have inter-county levies. Moving from Bungoma County to Nairobi, akitoka Bungoma atataxiwa akienda kwa another county, akitoka kwa third county atataxiwa in the other county until ifike Nairobi. So you'll find maybe Bungoma ametaxiwa 100 Gs, 100,000, I'm sorry, 100,000. Akifika in another county ametaxiwa 30,000. Ikifika another county ni 500,000. So what we're saying, there are interventions right now to harmonize all that, and if they can't, at least what is being taxed in Nairobi is what is taxed at the Martha County. Or if your good county, it's only taxed from where people are consuming it. So that is currently an intervention, not yet gone through, but is currently an intervention. So having said that, I think that's enough. Thank you.
So thank you so much. And she has brought in the issue of taxation, which is the current discussion in Kenya and elsewhere. Another question? Yes, please come. After that, I think we'll have a response to that. Yes, come.
Okay, good afternoon. Mine is on just and a comment. Kirwa, a student in my final year. Recently, we have had the farmers' crisis in Netherlands, where there was a plan by the government to minimize the number to work on agriculture. There was a debate that agriculture, especially farming, was a source of climate change. And my question is to the author of the report: if in the Western world there is that debate of climate change, and now we are now trying to focus on Africa, what is your opinion towards such a move when the Western world says that farming is also one of the causes of climate change, and yet we are coming to Africa and saying that Africa is the future? And finally, I think the second one is a comment on the involvement of the youth in agriculture. Personally, I'm a chicken farmer, and one of the issues that I face in that sector is the high cost of building the farming side, of setting up the chicken coos, and even buying the new breed of the chicken that come into the market. And for the younger generation, accessing that probably like a loan becomes an issue. And probably this goes to the representative of the Council of Governors. I'm thinking of including youth in this whole debate of agriculture. We need to have that access of probably loans, affordable loans, and we work with the government to ensure that the country becomes food secure. And finally, as we are now promoting also GMO, where is the space of the traditional foods that we really love, you know, the mrenda, the muhogo, the ngwashes, you know. Finally, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. He has brought in an issue which is an important issue. We don't just blame the youth for not participating in agriculture. They need some kind of support. And he has outlined the kind of support they need to participate. You have a question? Yeah.
Hello, my name is Thomas, a student of economics. And to the first panelist, I would like to have him elaborate more about the infrastructure basically laid on reducing the implementation costs and how it could be morphed for it to, from working in first world countries to third world countries, the basic issue of cash transfers. Also, to the second panelist, the research reaching policymakers, I think, was a really good point. But what about the interaction between policymakers and those people on the ground, such as the farmers? Because I think making policies in Kenya is totally detached from the local citizen. I feel like they do not have an active participation in the policies that are usually made that affect them. So what about the farmer and the policymakers? What about the cohesion and relationship between them instead of the researcher and the policymaker? I think that is a question that you should address and think about. And kudos to the point of food security affecting the youth. I think it's a really good point that is not usually very emphasized. And also to the person who's asked the questions before me, I think that was really good, investing in the youth and having them access the capital to set up the infrastructure for agriculture. And that is all I have. Thank you.
So I think maybe time to respond to some of those questions. Yes, we can start.
All right, thank you so much. And let me start with the youth aspect that came up all the time. Honestly, youth is always the future, and that's why we are always here, because we know that you guys are the future, and you will be able to shape this country and beyond. So that's why it's really also close to my heart to be here and to talk more and to have more interaction. Now, of course, we don't have too much time, so let me just pick up on a few things. So a lot of the commentators and the questions were related to the broader economy, jobs, nutrition, GMO, climate change, health, etc. And that's exactly why it's so important to talk about the food system. It's not like 30, 40 years ago, we talk about the Green Revolution, and we fix the maize issue and the soil issue, and then everything else will be fixed. No, we are living in a much more complex times, and an important part of the food system is always the consumer. And that brings me to this question of the native crops and the sorghum and the millet, etc. So I think we have to turn this the other way around and ask ourselves, why are we not eating millet and maize anymore? Why are we eating French fries? Why are we eating pasta and pizza, etc.? And for that we need wheat and rice and etc. I don't have an answer for that, but I think this whole food system approach helps us to think things differently. I'm quite sure if there is demand, and a lot of us are economists, no, if there was demand for the indigenous crops, maybe there would also be more production again. I know there is, all kind of campaigns from the private sector to promote. They want us to drink Coca-Cola and chicken and what have you. That is part of the story, but that's not the whole story, because we can decide in the end of the day ourselves what we would like to eat. Maybe on the importance of regional trade, I think this is a very, very valid point. Even within our countries, sometimes we have issues to move food around. Now, can regional trade solve all the issues? I'm not sure. Maybe not yet. Because if you think of the crisis that have hit, it's not only that wheat and maize are very expensive, it's also the energy, the fuel, and the fertilizer, etc. And so for those commodities that are very important inputs to the agricultural production, I think there's still a lot of linkages with the rest of the world. Now, of course, you can think of big development strategy kind of question, right? Should Kenya or should East Africa, in fact, should any country be completely self-reliant on food, on fuel and fertilizer? Should we produce everything by ourselves? And I mean, most of the economists would say no. I mean, we have trade, right? So that's why I think we have to emphasize the importance of trade, but we also have to emphasize that it may make sense to encourage the production of stuff in our country where we have a comparative advantage. And that again can create jobs, etc. So the very neoclassical theory that we can just trade, open our border, everything will be okay, has clearly not worked. Let's be very clear about this. So we have to find some middle ground here between open trade, but also nurturing our local industry and etc. Then GMO is of course and I'm always surprised. I mean, it's not only America, but it's also a lot of people in Europe come from who think GMO is something very terrible. And so I don't know, so it's maybe an issue of how we inform people, and also some of the lobby groups that are out there, but clearly science doesn't play a huge role in those opinions. And that's something where we also have to make sure that our science is more listened to, not only to policymakers, but also maybe the media, even in schools, etc., so that some of these questions are guided by science. Can GMO solve a food crisis? Honestly, I think it can make a contribution, but it might not be the answer to all the questions that we have, right? Because, okay, what is GMO doing? Probably you have higher yield at the moment. In the future, it could help to breed more drought-tolerant crops, more resilient crops, but I don't think we are quite there yet. So it's part of the puzzle, but I think it can be an important part of the puzzle, but it's probably not kind of silver bullet. And then maybe my final point, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I mean, who has caused climate change is very clear. It's Europe, the US, and more recently China, okay? So this is where all the emissions come from. And the emissions in Africa, the contribution is basically zero, no? So, but, okay, so let's move beyond the blame game. And I think this is where we can also make a contribution, is to, okay, now what can we do about it? And I think there should be more contribution from the international community, for sure, right? In terms of funding, in terms of many other things. And then we should also think of, what can we do better in our own country? And the money can help, but the money is not the whole story. We know it. We also need to think of better policies. We need to think think of better institutions, how can we use the money, what about the targeting, who should get it and who not. And I mean, maybe to conclude, that's a very broad statement, but I think that the global community, regional integration, but then national policies and strategy. If you put this all together, I think there will be a good solution to many of the issues that we have. I don't know if any of the commentators would like to add anything. There was also a bit of discussion about the science policy interface. There was a lot of discussion about digital tools and how they can help, etc. And that all gives us a lot of hope, no? We have young people, we have digital technologies, and I think those two things combined in itself can make really important contributions, so that it's not business as usual, but new business. So I could talk forever, but I probably should stop because I think we have other agenda items here. So back to you.
I think you have captured most of the questions that were raised, and probably is there any other question, comment? Please come. Yeah, the three of you just come, occupy, so that we save on time. Please come. The other one, yeah? Yeah. Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Moses Moshiri Mwangi. I'm a student of economics and statistics. I have a comment and a question. Well, as we have seen through the report, most of the issues with food shortages is depending on the multifaceted shocks happening in different systems. And therefore, for us to solve this, then we have to have a broader approach into that, because again, we must also avoid the trap of saying that we need to improve on the infrastructure system and then end up doing what the former government did, coming up with so many infrastructure projects, which will have very rough economic repercussion as time goes by. My question would be, given that shocks demand that we have an immediate reactionary to them, for example, if flood happen, then we need to react immediately with that. If drought happen, we need to react with that. But they have been concerned. World Bank at some point said that using of cash transfer to limit food shortages is not working per se, which of course Kwame disagree with because there haven't been enough time to study that. And also we know that food supply has some inequality with that because it may not end up reaching the target. So what exactly should we do, and how do we also ensure that we have a participatory kind of reaction to shock? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Vincent Ongore. I teach business at the Technical University of Kenya. In my previous life, I was a tax collector for a short time, just about years. And the reason I want to make this comment is that I spent 3 months each year in the Northern Hemisphere, and 9 months each year in the Southern Hemisphere. Now, in the north, we deal with the question of excess food. In the south, we deal with the issue of lack of adequate food. So I don't think the problem we are facing is lack of food. It is lack of ability to distribute food where it is needed. Now, for many years during my previous life as a tax collector, I was involved in the discussions trying to create a framework that would enable this to happen within COMESA, East African Community, and SADC. And then I realized that food, the question in food has taken a political dimension, that it sits at the very heart of sovereignty of countries. That countries, however hungry their people are or could be, do not want to be seen to be begging food. And they deliberately refuse to make it possible for food to move to countries where they have abundance, to the others where there is food inadequacy. And when we started the issue of customs union that culminated in the creation of the East African Community Customs Management Act of 2004, I'm sure many of you would know. Now, the problem that each or the member states was dealing with was the question of constricted or constricting revenues in case tariffs or custom duty was actually removed to enable food to move. So they were saying, we've been using the revenues to finance our development and the current expenditure. So if you remove it, what happens? One thing that they didn't consider was the fact that by coming together, you create bigger markets, and the hinterland for production and movement of goods should actually be enhanced. So I think we are addressing that there are rats around. I am complaining in Nairobi, everywhere I go, everyone wants some money. So let's organize the infrastructure for food distribution to enable us move that food to where it is needed. Thank you very much.
I'm so sorry I'm back here again. I won't come back here again. So I just want to speak to an economist that has asked a question about policies. I want to tell you that, please, I'm sorry if I go technical. There's a law requirement that every policy has to undergo public participation. So for it to be passed, we inakuwa imepita kwa counties na for people. A good example ni the previous bill that was subjected, I don't know if it's a policy or a bill, about taxation. Ilikuwa imetumwa kwa watu wa include their reviews and their comments. So just to answer you, there's that devolved function about counties na people should have a voice to what the policy includes. So I felt that you forgot to answer that. That's why I'm here. I won't come back here again.
Yeah, so what to do about the shock? I mean, the whole book is full of kind of, let's say, recommendations. It really depends on the kind of shock. Are we talking about a flood, a drought, a conflict, the country context, etc.? So maybe that would take a lot of time. So maybe please take a look at the book. Now, this story about there is enough food and we only have to distribute it, I think there is of kind of truth. And there is a lot of food waste, and not only in the US, but even here. So there is always a lot of things that can also be done locally. I think also the context here is a bit different because we are talking about crisis. And in times of crisis, and not only in times of crisis, but always, we know as economists, it's not only about the quantity of food, but it's about the price, right? And that gives a bit of indication of supply and demand. Now, I have to tell you, when talking about southern and northern hemisphere, etc. So, I mean, even in the US and in Europe, I mean, the prices for food have really skyrocketed. And don't think that it goes without noticing from the people, and it's not everyone is very rich over there. So a lot of people have actually suffered quite a bit from the high food prices. I mean, especially in the United States. I mean, 50% of the people in the US basically live on what we call low-skilled service jobs, cleaning, working in fast food restaurants, etc. There's a good documentary from Barack Obama on Netflix on that topic. I'd recommend it. What I'm trying to say is not only people in the global south, but even in the global north have felt that crisis. So luckily, the food price now on the global level starts coming down again, but it's still relatively high. So what we need to do for globally traded goods like wheat and rice, these very highly traded goods, yes, I mean, these prices are coming down. For a lot of the food prices in African countries, we haven't seen that to the same extent. And so again, the issue of distributing food is one element. Regional trade is another element. But sound food policies and proper investments by the government, but also to some extent change in behavior of some people in terms of food consumption pattern, food waste, all that I think needs to come together. Do we have any more questions? Or shall we wrap this up? It's getting a bit late now. So maybe I'll hand the floor back to you, but I wanted to thank all of you again for coming, and to the University of Nairobi and the profs here. We hope this is only the start, and we are looking forward to a very fruitful collaboration, more events, more research, maybe internships, etc. Thank you, karibu, asante sana.
So thank you so much for presenting us. Let me start by thanking the panelists, Dr. Njala, Kwame Owino, and Lenza. Can we clap for them? And thank you so much. Let us thank Dr. Clemens. He undertook the initiative of answering all the questions. So let us clap for him. Yeah, and we look forward to continued collaboration on this from our side. Especially the ASEA node, because the research that we do is mainly in that area, which touches food security, poverty, inequality. So we look forward to continued collaboration on research, dissemination, and another thing that we'll think about. So thank you so much. I wish to return the mic to the chair, Dr. Martin Olech.
Thank Thank you very much, the presenters and all those who participated in this event. First of all, as Professor Damiano has said, let us actually give applause for all the presenters as well as the panelists. This is just time for giving the vote of thanks. I don't know even where to start from. I don't know. But first of all, let me thank most sincerely Dr. Clements and the team from IFPRI for preparing such very good presentations. Yes, for preparing good presentations, and for giving very good insights. They have done a marvelous work. The event has actually been live globally, being actually watched everywhere. We have Dr. Frederick, who has actually been working on the TV. We have others also from the corporate affairs, and also Esther Nekesa. I don't know whether they are here. Do we have Dr. Frederick? Okay. For actually organizing all this so that, you know, people can be able to view everywhere. I also want to thank the academia, members from Kenyatta University, from Technical University of Kenya, and from Kipra, from ARC, from World Bank, for getting time to be here. We're actually very grateful also to Kenya National Statistics, from Oxfam and Hakjami, and from Institute of Social Accountability. And more so, I would also want to thank all students, you know, both graduates as well as undergraduate students for time to be here. I know usually this room capacity, but I think we have taken a bit of time, and some of you have already left. But we are actually very grateful, and I want you to clap for yourselves, our students. Thank you. Thank you very much. And even for the questions that you asked, I always say that the questions, you know, the kind of questions that you ask actually make us very proud as those who you, because I always say that it means we are preparing you very well. And so you are able to ask such kinds of questions. But even the are former students, and some of them are still continuing also. So, and for students, what I would want to say is that this is a very good opportunity also for networking, especially for those who are in the next 2 weeks. Gives you the network and see what's happening in the outside world. And of course, we have been having quite a number of these. So I also want to thank say that Professor Professor Jamano, when you are here, we must always thank you and so that they can know that we have those who mentored us, just like the way we are mentoring the current students now. So, and to every other person who actually participated in the success of this event, I also want to thank my staff, administrative staff from the Department of Economics and Development Studies, led by David, who is our admin. I don't know whether he's here or maybe he's attending to something else. I think he's outside there. And all of them, they have done a very great work. We've been having meetings, I think, in a series of meetings to be able to organize this particular event. Thank you very much for your time. And to all of you, please, thank you very much for getting time to come to this event. As the chairman of the Department of Economics and Development Studies, I do not take this for granted. I will continue inviting you for other events that are coming. We have a number of them coming also. On 12th June 2022, we will be having a very big conference taking place for a whole day, where the CS, Treasury, who is also a member of staff in our department, will actually be the chief guest, and we'll also continue inviting you so that you can get a lot of insights from such presentations. Last but not the least, we have some snacks outside there. Of course, it is a time for, networking. While we are taking tea there, you can actually mingle and discuss with the panelists for chances of, further networking, to develop the field of academia as much as possible. I don't know whether I've forgotten to thank anybody, but I think I've thanked all of you. And at this particular time, I think we want to end with a word of prayer. And who is going to pray for us? Oh, you can come here, is that not so? Then after that, after the prayers, we will actually move outside there and have some snacks and tea. Please don't pass without going there, please. There's plenty of tea there and snacks. Please pass by there. And of course, that is the opportunity also for networking. You can talk more to the presenters and discuss a number of issues that are very important. Thank you very much, and I wish you the best and a very good weekend. So I invite you come, you tell us your name, and then you can pray for us as we take our snacks and as we head to the weekend also. Maybe before the prayers, can we clap for ourselves? Thank you. Thank you very much.
Good evening. My name is Kipkorir Kevin, and let's pray. Lord Father, we come before this evening. We thank you, Lord, for these faces that have shown up. We thank you for the gift. We thank you for even this talk. Even as we go out there, that we go and wherever we can implement, we may implement. We put even our policymakers in your hands, that they may find it in their discussions to include such policies. And Lord, that we may be a better country, a better continent, and even live a better world for those coming after us. For it's in Jesus' name I pray this, trusting and believing. Amen.